President Muhammadu Buhari has presented the 2021 appropriation bill before a joint session of the National Assembly. A record of 13.08 trillion naira is being budgeted by the federal government for the next fiscal year. The spending plan is also 21% rise from the 10.8 trillion naira revised 2020 budget. This year's budget presentation exercise comes exactly a year after the current spending plan was laid by the president. And the president says the nation's economy faces serious challenges and may enter into yet another recession. He is also worried about the country's growing debt profile, but assures that his administration is up and doing to get these challenges over. In the 13.08 trillion naira spending plan, the budget assumes crude production of 1.86 million barrels a day, and an oil production of $40 per barrel with an exchange rate at 379 naira to the dollar. Well, breakdown shows that the National Assembly gets 128 billion naira, while the 380.2 billion naira was proposed for the Health Ministry. 3.8 trillion naira has been allocated to all ministries, departments and agencies for the execution of capital projects. Well, joining me now to analyze this further is Mukhtar Mohammed, CEO Finance. Thank you very much
for joining us on
this morning. So now in this budget presentation by the president, he says the government has implemented several projects in the 2020 fiscal year. Some include increased food availability through its Anchor Borrowers program, construction of roads and other infrastructural projects. But what's your assessment on the performance of the 2020 budget?
I think for me, the good thing about the 2020 budget is that we're seeing a lot of infrastructural work going on, like you rightly pointed out. That's the thing that we're seeing. If you look at the budget performance in 2020, you look at the infrastructural project, you look at the Lagos-Ibadan Express, you look at the Kano, Kaduna, and all the major infrastructural projects, they are ongoing. And I think for me, that was the best thing that has happened thus far with this administration in terms of their infrastructural development. It's one of the best in the history of this nation. So by and by that, you could say the budget has performed when you look at that in terms of infrastructure. But when you look at other segments in terms of maybe you say job creation, how much of this infrastructural development, how much job have they been able to create, how much of this budget have affected the ordinary man by putting food on their table. Just yesterday, we were made to believe that about 78 million Nigeria are extremely poor, just within a year. So when you look at that, then it's mixed results.
So with a spending plan of about 13.08 trillion naira for 2021, which is a bit higher than the 2020 revised budget of 10.8 trillion naira, what are expectations?
Well, I differ when people say that it's a bit higher. Then if it's a bit higher, then you need to look at last year at this time, the president was presenting the budget, the exchange rate was 360 to the dollar. The president is presenting the budget this year. Officially, the exchange rate that he's presenting the budget with is about $379. So you can see that in terms of that, when you look at that, the purchasing power of the naira has gone down. Then, but let's look at the figure, 13.1 trillion, which, like you said, is higher than that of last year, fine. But the challenges are still there. The same challenges we faced last year is the same challenges we're going to face this year. We're going to face challenges of budget deficits. Almost, if you look at the expenditure, I mean, the revenue that we accrue to is about 7 point something. So we already have a deficit, and at the oil benchmark at $40 per barrel is going to also be a very challenging time. At exchange rate at 379, it's also going to be very challenging for the government. So when you look at it, what you have on ground, what they are proposing, then it's a very, very ambitious budget.
Talking about ambitious projects, it's about 3.85 trillion naira has been expected to be available for capital projects. Power, housing, of course, health also takes a chunk of this. What do you make of the arrangements?
I think for the first time, I must commend that for the first time we seem to be getting some things right. The health sector have an increase of about 157% after the pandemic. Something has to make us wake up. I think the pandemic has waked us up, and that is, for me, that is a wonderful achievement for this government. Educational sector also had their own increase of about 35%. That also is a welcome development. So for me, those two sectors are the key drivers at the moment of the Nigerian economy. And again, power. If you look at the power project, they say the Mambila power project, the Zinguru power project, and also the rural electrification project that is ongoing in the 36 states of the Federation. For me, that is the best news from this budget. If we are able to implement this by this time next year or by this time December when we are here again, we should be saying that some of those projects, the president should be telling us that those projects were completed, because even from his speech, he said we are not going to start any new project until we have completed the ones we start. And the Zungeru, the Mambela, and the rural electrification project are not just projects that are happening, and they are continuation. So hopefully by this time next year, when he will be presenting his budget again, hopefully we should be talking about those projects that have been completed and the impact is being felt by every Nigerian.
So yes, capital allocation for the health sector has saw an increase of about 157%. And according to the president, numerous primary healthcare centers will be equipped and upgraded across the 6 geopolitical zones, and that their funds have been provided for the provision of personal protective equipment for health workers. Now, how confident are you about this government's will to live up to its promises in the next fiscal year?
Well, I'm as confident as as when I see the first project taken up. So hopefully, its budget, its projection, at least let's see how many percentage or how many of these healthcares will be built or will be equipped. Because the challenge is not that there's no healthcare centers all over Nigeria, all the local governments, but there are no equipment. So I don't think when we're talking about building up healthcare centers, I think we're just talking about renovating of those existing healthcare. But I think what really matters for Nigerians, especially the mortality rates, we said we are now the highest in the world. Before it was India, but Nigeria has taken over. So especially in the rural areas. So it will be good to see those healthcare centers, not just having the good physical structure, but having the equipment, especially for mothers and children.
Well, in his presentation as well, the president said the government is already implementing several measures to overcome its fiscal constraints through addressing some revenue leakages in the deregulation of the oil price and petrol and the implementation of the service-based electricity tariffs. Now, what do you make of this, even as the government says these reforms are to ensure improved public service delivery?
Well, when you talk about service-based electricity tariff, I think it took the labor union to threaten to go on strike before we are beginning. The president is saying that we have a service-based electric tariff. What we had before now that they went on strike was not service-based electrical tariff. So maybe based on the information he's getting now between the meeting with labor and the technical committee, that is why he's making this comment. I think that's good news for us. Then, secondly, when he's talking about the other aspect, I just feel deregulation is the best thing that's happened to Nigeria if we will be able to keep it. And when you talk about revenue leakages, yes, deregulation is one area that we have seen revenue leakages. I mean, subsidy payment, one area that we've seen a lot of revenue that would have gone into infrastructures, into job creation, into education, into healthcare, being squandered through the vices of subsidy payment. So for me, that is a good one. But when you talk about revenue, I think this government has done well in terms of revenue. They've diversified their revenue. They are not looking at oil alone. They are looking at the tax bracket. They've increased their tax bracket over Nigerians, and increased value-added tax of recent. So for me, in terms of revenue diversification, they've done well. But when you talk about diversification of the economy, where they are saying that they will have about 1.49 trillion from the non-oil sector, I think it's very ambitious, but I hope we could meet that.
Then before we let you go briefly now, he talked about some social safety nets that will be implemented to cushion the effects of the most vulnerable and business owners, where about 420 billion naira has been provided to sustain the social investment program. What do you make of this?
Well, when it comes to social safety net, as long as you don't have data, that scheme is bound to fail. Yeah. So, and I'm happy that for the first time in 20 years, the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics and the World Bank will be doing that to get data of smaller businesses. That could be one of those avenues that the government should use. Because when you talk about the vulnerable Nigerians, who are the vulnerable Nigerians? Where do they live? What are the yardstick? What document? What data do you use to think about who are the vulnerable Nigerians? So for me, that scheme is bound to fail, because when you have a weak structure in terms of implementing things that have to do with intervention, then it opens a lot of room for corruption. And that is why we've seen of recent, the EFCC is talking about the feeding program from schools that was ensuring a lot of corruptions, money that were meant for the feeding of students, finding their way into private accounts. So for me, once you don't have those data, when you try to go up with most of all these things, it doesn't work. And that is why we are not seeing the type of result we see in the type of money that the CBN and others are pushing into intervention since the pandemic, because of weak structural and weak institution also. So for me, I think the first thing the president should be doing is, let's get the data, let's know who and who deserve this by base the information we get from them.
All right, and that's a fine place to leave it. Mohammed Mokhtar, CEO, Finance with Mokhtar. Thank you very much.